Okay, what we're going to be looking at is Truman's administration, and that's what this first picture was. But we're going to look at the roots of the Cold War, and a lot of it stems from Yalta, and I know some of y'all just put Yalta on there for the first question. But one of the things that is going to lead to issues between the Soviet Union and the U.S. is when Yalta, we said that these nations of Eastern Europe were supposed to have free elections. Does Stalin allow for free elections in Eastern Europe?
No.
No. And so this is question number 2. What he will do here, he doesn't allow for free elections because he wants this area right here of what we know as Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria to become a buffer zone. Basically his defensive line. That if Germany were ever to rise up, these countries, because they have like-minded governments, will be defenders to protect Russia. So basically they're his casualties. They're his pawns if you play chess. Y'all know chess and it has the pawns. Those are the ones you sacrifice first. That's what he wants them to be communist. Does he allow them to have free elections to choose to be communist? No, he sends in people to have coup d'etats and they will turn to communism. And so that was for number 2. Where did Stalin want to establish friendly governments and spheres of influence in Eastern Europe? Why? They're going to be what for him? Buffer states that in case Germany ever rose up again, we're going to see that they would defend him. We're going to see other issues that happened out of Yalta is that West Germany should have been divided into 4 zones, and they had every intention of uniting zones. Do they unite? No, essentially the U.S., the British, and the French unite their zones, but the Soviet Union will keep its zone to itself. East Germany will be formed under the Soviet Union, and we see the U.S. would want a strong international peacekeeping organization to replace the League of Nations, which is called the UN. So Churchill starts to realize, and y'all saw this in the opening parts of that film, that Churchill comes to the United States, he comes to Missouri to give a speech about the Iron Curtain. And the Iron Curtain is not a real curtain, but what he's talking about is the division. Do y'all see this red line? He's saying there's a clear division, that there is democracies in the West and what is there in the East. And he says if the U.S. does like it does in World War I, that after the war it becomes isolationist, what could happen to Europe? It could fall to what? Communism. So he's urging the United States, because it is the #1 superpower now, because it has nuclear weapons, because it has been untouched from war, and it's the #1 industrial giant, that it should not step into isolation again, that it needs to step up and to be able to protect the Western Europeans from the Eastern communists. So he just warned them of the Soviet expansion. So we know this was Yalta. And this is the roots of the Cold War. Why were the Soviets skeptical about the West? The first thing, we were slow to open the Western Front. And really, when we did open the Western Front, was it where Stalin wanted it? Stalin wanted it where? France. Where do we open the second front? Italy, and then once we practiced it there, North Africa, Sicily, Italy, we will then do it in France. And that's one reason why he's skeptical. The second thing is they were frozen out of the atomic bomb, but they knew about it through espionage. The last thing is, in the war, the U.S. had started sending aid to all the allies in the Lend-Lease. Once the war is over, the U.S. will continue Lend-Lease money to the British, but stop aid to the Russians. Did they face the full frontal force of the German army in this war? What would this money have been helpful to them? And so it's these 3 things that you should have on question 1 is what's going to lead to the tensions. So does World War II set the foundation for the Cold War? The irony in history is every war leads to another war. So World War I set the foundation for the Treaty of Versailles that led to World War II. Tensions in World War II caused the Cold War. And we're going to see things that happen are going to set the foundations for the next war. So how do you feel about 1 now? Okay, so the Soviets want internal security, so that's why they want those buffer ones. They're their pawns, they're their defensive line. And we're going to see another thing that's going to be created is the United Nations, but we also know the International Monetary Fund was a hope that we would not have countries turn to communism, that they could seek aid through the International Monetary Fund. And it was for the war-torn nations to get stabilized currency because they were fearful, just like in the U.S., that we were fearful that when we came back from war, what were we going to go back to economically? The Depression. And the International Monetary Fund is the whole purpose is to stabilize currency so we don't go into another depression, and we see the Soviets will decline participation in this. We are going to see the UN, and I know a lot of you had questions on number 5 about the membership of the United Nations, but we are going to see the United Nations is going to be created, and it was a precursor to this was the League, right? And its whole thing, it should have world peace, but did the League really work the first time? The UN will work because it will have a military force. It creates a general charter, and in this, they have a Security Council. That is the membership on number 5. In the Security Council, it is the US, the USSR, nationalistic China. That sounds weird, right? Y'all have learned on your study guide that China will fall to Mao Zedong and will be communist. Do you think we're going to recognize China? We don't recognize China until Richard Nixon. So this little place called nationalistic China is actually Taiwan. Y'all know where Taiwan is? Okay, that's what we recognize as China. Britain and France. Is there an ideological rift here? Is there someone who is not similar to the other ideologies of this group? Yes. Which group? The Soviets. And one of the things is that they're going to create a general assembly that will have people of other nations. But any single veto can overrule all. So in this Cold War, when we go to Korea, who would not want to give aid to Korea and go in to stop it? The Soviets, so they don't show up the day of, and so that's why the UN will go in. So we're going to see that the Soviet Union, amidst this whole thing of the Cold War, when the times the UN is going in to prevent the spread of communism, they're only able to do because the Soviets don't show up. Okay, so the Cold War, and a lot of y'all had this definition that it was a 40-year war between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. The reason why it's called a Cold War because does ever the Soviet Union and the U.S. face off with guns and fight each other? No, and that is why it's a Cold War. We will use other wars to have indirect confrontation with each other, but it's never the U.S. versus the Soviet Union. So we will go into Vietnam, and are we going to indirectly fight the Soviet Union? We are going to go into Korea, and are we going to indirectly fight the Soviet Union? Yes. And so this is why it's Cold War. So we got 5 now about the Security Council and the General Assembly. The other thing the UN decides to do is to go into Germany and try for war crimes of what happened to our victims of the Holocaust. And this is the Nuremberg trials, and some people will be hanged. The other issue is Germany. The Soviet Union never wants to see it be revitalized. And so what it will do, and y'all saw this on our study guide, they're going to rip out all the resources so that it could be tough for the German Republic to ever be created. They're going to take all of these resources and bring it into the Soviet Union. So if you were in East Germany and you see the Soviets ripping it out, would you want to live there? Mm-hmm. Are you going to buy a ticket to get out of there? Mm-hmm. Yes, and we're going to see a massive exodus of people because of what the Soviets are doing. We are going to see the U.S. and the Western Europeans feel that the German economy is vital. If we do not fix their economy, could another dictator rise up? And could we have World War II all over again? And so they realize that we have to have an active role in fixing the economy of Germany so we do not have another world war. And so there was a question on your study guide, number 6, is that correct? How was Germany divided?
Yes.
First off, it was divided into 4 zones. Do y'all see my 4 zones? There's the Soviet sector, the English sector, the French sector, the US sector. Most people only think of Germany being divided, but they also divide the capital. And the capital's in whose sector? The USSR. Berlin is divided into 4. There's a US sector, a British sector, a French sector, and a Soviet sector. Is that going to lead to problems? Yes. So does everybody have 6? It was divided into 4 occupation zones. Germany was divided amongst these people. We see that Berlin is also divided. We are going to see that the Soviet Union is going to reap its resources out of this area. The next thing I want to talk about is the reconstruction of Japan. we are going to see that many people will find out that what the nuclear bombs do, they totally devastate their industries, right? And so the U.S. will go in and we're going to reconstruct the Japanese government, and they're allowed to keep what? Their emperor, even though we wanted an unconditional surrender, which we talked about that being in the burdens of power. We're going to see that they're going to adopt a constitution, they're going to renounce militarism, and they're going to accept Western democracy. The other thing is that the United States is going to encourage U.S. businessmen to go into Japan and industrialize its auto industry. Do y'all know some Japanese cars that are really, really good? Toyota. Nissan. Is Mitsubishi one of them?
Yeah.
I know it has other stuff. Okay, but American businesses go and take this new technology there. And they're going to start a whole car revolution in Japan. Eventually, this is going to bite us in the butt in the future because those industries will be revitalized and they're going to start producing cars that get 30 miles per gallon. And in America, are we going to revitalize our car industry? No, our cars get 10 miles per gallon. So in the 1970s, when we have an oil shortage, who are we going to buy cars from? America or Japan? Japan, and this is going to lead to why Japan will become an industrial giant in the 70s, because we're going to have issues with oil embargoes. So a lot of you were missing this one on 13. George Kean is going to be an ambassador to the USSR, and he's recognizing stuff that's occurring. And he's going to warn of the Soviet ideology that they're hostile towards other governments. And he's going to present a doctrine, so don't write this down. His doctrine is this idea, because they would like to spread, he introduces this doctrine of containment. He says they want to spread. Do we want them to spread? No, just like when someone's sick, what is required of them to be?
Quarantine.
Quarantine at home so they don't spread. And George Kean is going to give the idea to the United States that we should follow this doctrine of containment so that communism won't spread. Let it exist where it exists so we don't have to go to direct war. But don't let it go beyond there. And so this is why the U.S. will go to Korea. They will go to Vietnam because we want to contain and not allow communism to spread. So do you got 13 now? And so we're going to see that to prevent the spread of communism, we will go into other places. This will lead us into what did the fear that the U.S. have of the British abandonment of Turkey and Greece. If you looked at where Turkey and Greece were, they're on the other side of the Iron Curtain. They're a democratic nation. So is the threat that they could fall to communism prevalent?
Yes.
And so that is why we're going to get involved, because the British are going to pull out. And Truman's going to realize if they pull out, that leaves a vacuum for the Soviet Union to come in and take over. So this is why Truman and every single president after this time period is going to have a doctrine, and you will be tested on it. So I'll give you little ways to remember it. So Truman, and this is number 15 on your study guide, is going to send aid, $400 million. And a lot of you just had it to Greece, but you also have to add Turkey in there, so that these people will not fall to communism. These will be two strategic places for the United States that eventually, when the Cold War escalates, we are going to put some nuclear weapons facing the Soviet Union, and they're 5 minutes away of hitting their capital. Strategically, they're important, and also it is an important reason because we're trying to follow containment. We will also recognize Israel, which will lead us into a whole lot of problems that we will get into the 60s and 70s. So there's Turkey and Greece. The way to remember Turkey and Greece is Truman's doctrine. As I always think, Truman starts with a Th, so I think of a holiday that starts with a Th is Thanksgiving, right? So I always think Truman likes to eat greasy turkey. Okay? That's how you'll, because Eisenhower will have a doctrine, Nixon will have a doctrine, LBJ will have a doctrine, we'll have doctrines after doctrines. So what type of turkey does Truman like? Greasy turkey. Okay, Marshall Plan will be implemented. And a lot of the fear is that these nations are gonna turn to communism. They're having depressions. Many people are asking for more government control. And the idea of socialism and communism is becoming more prevalent. So Secretary of State George Marshall is going to offer a suggestion. He says, instead of letting that stuff ferment, the idea of socialism and communism, let us give them aid. And give them aid so they can rebuild their economies. And once their economy is rebuilt, capitalism will survive. We will see that the U.S. Is going to try to go into Czechoslovakia, but the Soviet Union realizes that it could possibly lose Czechoslovakia, so it puts a coup d'etat to keep Czechoslovakia communist. The U.S. will allocate $12.5 billion over the next 4 years. Do you think the Soviet Eastern Sphere is allowed to accept any of this money? Mm-hmm. No. And we will see communism will lose ground. Okay, y'all had this on your study guide about the National Securities Act. We have not had the Department of Defense. Prior to this time period, we had the Department of War, the Secretary of War. But because of this global war, we are going to change into the Department of Defense, and it's going to create, at this time, we're also building the Pentagon. Y'all have seen that massive structure? That is getting built. We realize that we need to have more advisors to the president, and what is going to happen is that we are going to create the National Security Council. This National Security Council will give information to the president of what is going on in other countries. So we need to form an organization that can find out information that is going on in other countries, which will lead to the creation of the CIA. We're going to see we also establish a draft because we are very fearful. We have bombs, they have bombs. What are we going to go into? A war. We better be prepared because usually we've had our soldiers be ill prepared, called doughboys. This is also going to lead to NC number 68. And this is in response to the fall of China. China will fall to communism. Has containment failed us? And we're going to see that this is going to implement a large-scale military buildup that we could have soldiers ready at any time to go into war. So will we be ready for Korea? Will we be ready for Vietnam? And this is just following containment. Another thing is we're going to have an Atomic Energy Commission that is going to investigate the effects of the nuclear bombs. We will actually test nuclear bombs in the United States on our own soldiers to test the effects that it has on the human body. Okay? If you don't believe me, there's a video called Atomic Cafe that goes over this. There's a BBC special on the atomic bombs that talks about what is going on. They also advise what happens to humans, and they're going to advise the president on the usage of it. So our next problem was Berlin. We talked about it strategically being located in the Soviet sector. And the Soviets don't like this area of freedom. Because do the East Germans want to stay there? No, because what is the Soviet Union doing to all of the resources in East Germany? Stripping it, and people are realizing we're not going to have a good livelihood here. So people are fleeing into West Berlin to get a ticket to leave. And so the Soviet Union, what it will do is put up a blockade that the U.S. cannot send in any railroads or any troops or any cars to give aid because they're going to starve out West Berlin. So can't send in by road, so Eisenhower is going to advise Truman to send it in by air. For over almost a year, 11 months, stuff is sent by plane and parachuted down so that people could live. And again, this is containment. If we let this fall, what could happen next? Communism could spread to West Germany. So Truman is going to take a strong stance. Have you ever seen Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs? The premise of that has come from here. Because the kids they will interview later, they'll ask him where his food come from. Remember, these people have been in war for so long that most food came in through the air. Yeah. And so for the next 11 months, stuff will be flown in. And we're going to see that the Soviets will have to lift the blockade. Did containment work? Yes, because does West Berlin fall? No, the U.S. is still able to obtain it. But because of what happens in Berlin, things have gotten a little bit feisty. We're going to create an alliance system. Gosh, what do alliance systems lead to? War. The U.S. would create the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is a mutual defense alliance between the U.S. and the Western European countries, basically that surround the North Atlantic Ocean. They said an attack on one is an attack on all. And in reaction to the creation of NATO, the Soviet Union will create its own pact called the Warsaw Pact. Again, an attack on one is an attack on all. Are we getting ready for nuclear war? And we will see the Soviets, they will explode their own atomic bomb. And how do they get the information on this? Espionage. Which are the peach countries? What alliance? Warsaw, the green ones? Okay, so now we have to look at China. After World War II, there is a power vacuum. Remember, the Japanese have taken over China, they've taken over Korea, they've taken over Indochina. And now that they have been taken out of there is a power vacuum. Who will control? And we see in China, there's going to be two groups of people vying for power. We see people who support the nationalists, Chiang Kai-shek, or JJ for short, which I like to call him, which is question number, where is it? People have that one blank. 22. Who did the U.S. support? We're going to support this guy, JJ. However, he's going to be fighting against another guy named Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong has endorsed communism. It's a little bit different than the Soviet Union's communism. The Soviet Union's communism focused on industrialization and collectivization of farms. However, the Chinese communism is focused on the propaganda and still agrarian, not much industrial. And we will see Mao Zedong's forces are able to defeat Chiang Kai-shek, and he is exiled. Do we want to recognize Mao Zedong? And so what will happen is that this area is not going to get the seat in the UN. On a lot of, my mom has a globe that she gave me, and I left it at the old school. It basically had this blacked out. And what it had China on is this little pickle island right here. I can't believe I left that globe there. But this was recognized as China, and that's the one that had the UN seat. It isn't until 1973 with Richard Nixon that we recognized China. Okay, hydrogen bomb. It's 100 times more explosive than the atomic bomb. We get the bomb by 52, they get the bomb by 53. How do you think they get it? Espionage. And that's why this whole witch hunt is happening. Remember how we talked about that last time, that we're looking within the government, we're looking within the military? And it's because, how are they getting this stuff so quickly? And we're going to see we basically have the ability to kill all humankind. You drop one in every single state, everybody's gone. So, this leads us into the Korean War. One of the promises at the end of World War II is that the Soviet Union will come in on August 8th to help us deal with the problem of the Japanese and their realm. What has occurred is that they don't come into mainland Japan, but they're going to help us in Korea. They're going to invade through North Korea and establish, let me do this. The Soviet Union is going to come in through North Korea, and they're supposed to establish at least stability. We will come in through South Korea. We're going to divide it at the 38th parallel and have free elections to unite the Korea. Okay? We both divide. Do you think we unite? Because if we were to have free elections, what area would win? The communist North Korea or the democratic South Korea? We're hoping the democratic South Korea, but we're very fearful that who could possibly win. Anytime we hear of free elections in U.S. history, do you think they ever happen? No. And so what will occur is that North Korea will invade South Korea. The U.S. cannot go in without consulting the United Nations. We will use the National Security Council number 68, which allowed for our military buildup. And we will go through the UN and have a policing action to return everything to what it was. General Douglas MacArthur will go in and realize that this war is a stalemate. We cannot move much. We have been pushed all of our troops down to Pusan. He has come through Incheon and pushed back the forces. He says, look, the only way we could get this done is to bring in a nuclear bomb. Do you think Truman wants to use another bomb? And so MacArthur gets upset. He's like, basically, this guy is preventing me from using my power source. And he criticizes him. Do you criticize your boss?
Yes.
Okay, you secretly in your mind and to other people, but do you tell him to his face? And so this is why Truman will fire MacArthur. And so basically, we're in a stalemate. We keep on having negotiations. And the next President Eisenhower says, look, if you elect me as president, I will go in there and I will resolve this and the war will be over. He said, I promise to personally go to Korea, get this war done. And then he does get elected. He does visit Korea. He threatens the use of what? Nuclear weapons. And this is how we get the stalemate. And this is how currently Korea is divided. The 38th parallel. They don't have to have free elections. And we will see they create a DMZ, a demilitarized zone. Today, this is how Korea is divided. But do we see one nation is more aggressive than the other?
Yes.
Yes, one nation keeps on just testing rockets over the other nation, right? Okay? And this stuff that is in the Cold War really stems into current times. And I think we got done with time.